At 3 a.m., the billionaire entered his restaurant and saw the new waitress crying while scrubbing the floor. When he discovered the reason, he was speechless. She was hiding something that would change both their lives forever. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous song as Sarah Mitchell scrubbed the baseboards of Meridian Restaurant with movements so mechanical they seemed robotic. Her hands, raw and red from constant cleaning, moved in practiced circles. The bucket of murky water had gone cold hours ago, but she didn't bother refreshing it. Heat was a luxury, one of many she'd eliminated from her life over the past 6 months. It was 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. Days had become a blur of work shifts, hospital visits, and sleepless nights spent calculating whether she had enough for both Emma's medication and next month's rent. Emma, her 6-year-old daughter, sleeping fitfully in their cramped apartment 3 blocks away, coughing that terrible cough that no over-the-counter syrup could fix. The pediatrician had been clear. Without the prescribed medication, Emma's asthma could worsen, possibly become life-threatening. Sarah sat back on her heels, abandoning the baseboard. Her eyes burned with exhaustion and tears she'd promised herself she wouldn't cry. Not here, not at work. But the weight of it all, the crushing, suffocating weight of being completely alone, finally cracked her carefully constructed composure. She was 30 years old and had nothing to show for it except a daughter she loved more than her own life, and a mountain of debt that grew monthly. Her ex-husband had disappeared when Emma was born. Sarah's parents had died in a car accident when Emma was 3. She worked 3 jobs, cleaning restaurants, babysitting on weekends, and processing orders from home during the few hours when Emma slept. Every penny had a destination. None of it was enough. A tear fell onto her jeans, dark and unforgiving against the worn denim. "Why are you crying?" Sarah's head snapped up so quickly she felt dizzy. Standing in the entryway was a man in an expensive charcoal suit, his tie loosened, his dark hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. He was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with sharp features that suggested power and authority. His eyes, a piercing grey blue, were studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. Marcus Sterling. She recognized him from the newspapers, tech billionaire. He'd just bought majority stake in the Meridian Restaurant chain. She'd seen him here before, always alone, always serious, always moving through the restaurant like he owned the very air around it. Because, technically, he did. Sarah scrambled to her feet, wiping her face with the back of her hand. She looked away, humiliated. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. I'll finish up right away. I didn't think anyone would be here this late." Marcus took a step closer, and Sarah's entire body went rigid. She'd learned to be wary of powerful men. They made promises they didn't keep. They took what they wanted. They disappeared when responsibility called. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice low and measured. "Why are you crying?" There was something in his tone that wasn't cold, despite his reputation. It was something closer to concern. "I'm fine," Sarah said automatically, the lie slipping out easily after years of practice. Just tired." Marcus studied her for a long moment, then turned and walked to the kitchen. Sarah heard the refrigerator open, the clink of glasses, the sound of water running. When he returned, he handed her a bottle of mineral water and gestured to one of the nearby tables. "Sit," he commanded. Sarah considered refusing. She should refuse. Every instinct told her to grab her things and leave, to get home to Emma. But something about his direct gaze, his lack of performative kindness, made her trust him just enough. She sat. Marcus took the chair across from her. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his face. This was a man who didn't sleep well, either. His eyes held the same hollow quality hers did when she caught her reflection in mirrors. The look of someone carrying weight they weren't sure they could bear. "What's your name?" he asked. Sarah Mitchell." How long have you worked here, Sarah Mitchell? 3 months. She took a sip of the water. It was cold and refreshing. It's good work. Steady hours. Marcus didn't respond to that. Instead, he asked, "Is it the job that's making you cry at 3 in the morning, or is it something else?" Sarah wanted to maintain her walls. She'd become expert at it. But something about the genuine nature of his question, the absence of judgment in his eyes, broke through her defenses. "I have a daughter," she heard herself say. She's sick, and I can't afford the medication she needs. I've been working extra hours, but it's not enough. It's never enough." The moment the words left her mouth, Sarah regretted them. She'd just admitted to a billionaire, a man who controlled her employment, that she was struggling. But Marcus didn't react with pity. Instead, he asked, "What's her name?" "Emma." "Emma," he repeated, as if testing the name. "How sick?" "The doctors say she has severe asthma. Without the right medication, it could become dangerous. The prescription is expensive. My insurance doesn't cover it." Sarah wrapped her hands around the water bottle. "I've been saving, but between rent and food and everything else, I'm running out of time." Her cough is getting worse. Marcus stood abruptly and Sarah's heart seized. She'd said too much. He would think she was after his money. She would lose this job. But instead of firing her, Marcus walked to the kitchen and returned with his wallet. He pulled out a business card and placed it on the table. "This is my personal physician's number," he said. "Tell him that Marcus referred you. Don't worry about the cost. He'll handle it." Sarah stared at the card, unable to process what was happening. "Why would you—" she started. "Because no child should suffer because of circumstances beyond their control," Marcus said quietly. "And because I can help, and doing so costs me nothing but a phone call." He turned and walked back toward his office, leaving Sarah alone with a business card in one hand and water in the other, feeling as though her entire world had just shifted. She didn't know yet that this moment, this small act of kindness, would become the most important night of her life. Doctor. Richard Ashford's office was nothing like the clinic Sarah usually visited. Instead of plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting, the waiting room featured soft jazz, plush seating, and art on the walls. The receptionist, an elegant woman with kind eyes, had smiled warmly when Sarah mentioned Marcus's name. Within an hour, Emma had been thoroughly examined and was clutching a prescription for her medication. "She'll be much more comfortable within a few days," Dr. Ashford had assured Sarah. "This is an excellent medication for childhood asthma." The medication cost was waived. When Sarah had asked about payment, the receptionist simply said, "It's been taken care of," with a knowing smile. Over the next 2 weeks, Emma transformed. The constant cough subsided, her energy returned, and she was sleeping through the night without gasping for breath. Sarah found herself able to sleep more than 3 hours at a time, her anxiety about her daughter's health finally releasing its stranglehold on her nervous system. She expected nothing more from Marcus Sterling. The kindness in her experience had been an anomaly. She threw herself into her work with renewed energy, grateful and determined to prove herself a valuable employee. Then, 3 weeks after the 3 a.m. encounter, Marcus appeared at the restaurant during her shift. Sarah was taking a table's order when she noticed him standing in the entrance. Their eyes met across the dining room, and something electric passed between them. A recognition, a pull that Sarah didn't quite understand. He was seated at a table in her section. "Good evening, Sarah," he said as she approached, notepad in hand. His tone was casual, but his eyes held something deeper. "I hope Emma's medication is working well." "It is," Sarah said, aware of her heart rate accelerating. "Thank you, again. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to repay me," Marcus said, studying the menu without really reading it. "How is she otherwise? Happy?" Sarah found herself sharing details about Emma's recent artwork, her love of ballet, her obsession with a particular animated movie she'd watched 17 times. Marcus listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed he was actually paying attention. When she brought his order, he asked her to sit for a moment. "I have a proposition for you," he said. "My company is opening a new hospitality division. The position would pay 40% more than you're making here, with benefits, including excellent health insurance." Sarah's throat tightened. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a better life," Marcus corrected, "if you want it. There's no pressure, but I believe you're capable of more than cleaning tables." She should have recognized it as suspicious, but desperation and hope were powerful, and Sarah had been starving for both. "I'd like that very much," she said. "Thank you." The new position was based in a gleaming office building in Midtown Manhattan. Sarah's role was Senior Guest Relations Coordinator for Sterling Hospitality. She had a desk, a computer, and a salary that allowed her to move Emma from their cramped apartment to a beautiful two-bedroom in a safer neighborhood. For the first month, Sarah barely saw Marcus. She worked diligently, learning the systems, exceeding expectations, and proving that his faith in her hadn't been misplaced. The team respected her, and her natural empathy made her exceptional at her job. Then came the company gala. It was a black-tie event to celebrate the successful launch of their first luxury hotel in Manhattan. Sarah had debated whether to attend, but when Marcus personally extended the invitation, she found herself saying yes. Her dress was from a modest boutique, but it fit perfectly, a deep emerald that brought out her hazel eyes. She'd had her hair professionally styled for the first time in years, and as she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Emma, staying with a trusted neighbor, had been thrilled about her mother's transformation. "You're so pretty, Mommy," she'd said, hugging Sarah carefully so as not to wrinkle the dress. The ballroom was breathtaking: crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, servers circulating with champagne and canapes. Sarah felt out of place among the Manhattan elite, but she kept her shoulders back and her chin up, determined not to feel like an imposter. She was admiring the art installation in the corner when Marcus appeared beside her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Sarah turned to him and her breath caught. In a tuxedo, Marcus Sterling was devastating, his sharp features softened by the formal wear, his grey-blue eyes reflecting the light of 1,000 crystals. "Thank you," she managed. "This event is incredible." "Would you dance with me?" he asked. It wasn't a question, really. It was a declaration. Sarah knew in that moment that dancing with Marcus Sterling would change something fundamental, but she was tired of being cautious. She placed her hand in his. The orchestra was playing a classical waltz, and Marcus drew her onto the dance floor with practiced ease. He was an excellent dancer, confident and controlled. As he guided her through the movements, Sarah felt her worries temporarily dissolve. "I've been thinking about you," Marcus said quietly as they danced. "Constantly. It's unprofessional and probably unwise, but it's true." Sarah's heart was racing. "You shouldn't think about me like that." "Why not?" "Because you're my boss, because you're on another level entirely, because this would be a mistake." Marcus pulled her slightly closer. "Some mistakes are worth making." When the song ended, he walked her to the terrace overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The city glittered beneath them, thousands of lights stretching to the horizon. "I know this is complicated," Marcus said, "and I know I'm not the man you probably want in your life, but I can't stop thinking about what it would be like to know you, really know you, not as an employee, but as someone I care about." Sarah looked at this powerful man who'd somehow seen something in her worth saving, and realized that she'd been falling for him since the moment he'd handed her a business card at 3 in the morning. "Okay," she whispered. Okay? Marcus smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. You make it very hard to maintain professional distance. Then stop maintaining it, Sarah said. Marcus pulled her into his arms and kissed her under the New York stars, and Sarah felt, for the first time in years, as though she might actually be going to be okay. Dating Marcus Sterling was like stepping into a different universe. Within weeks, Sarah had experienced things she'd only read about in magazines: private jet travel, five-star restaurants, weekend trips to the Hamptons. Marcus was attentive, generous, and surprisingly tender, qualities Sarah wouldn't have expected from a man with his reputation. But paradise, Sarah was learning, always had complications. The first came in the form of Victoria Ashford, Marcus's ex-fiancée. She appeared at a Sterling Hospitality board meeting that Sarah was attending, and her eyes narrowed when she saw Marcus and Sarah together. "Well, well," Victoria said, approaching them during the break with a predatory smile. She was stunning, blonde, polished from old money. "I didn't realize Marcus had a new secretary. How quaint." Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but Marcus's hand found the small of her back, a protective gesture. "Sarah is Senior Guest Relations Coordinator," Marcus said coldly, "and she's none of your concern." Victoria's smile widened. "Marcus has a pattern. He finds women he thinks he can save, showers them with attention and gifts, and then realizes they're not equipped for his world. It never lasts." Sarah wanted to disappear, but Marcus simply pulled her closer. "Victoria, you and I ended because I didn't love you. But with Sarah, I'm beginning to wonder if I was wrong." After Victoria left, Sarah pulled Marcus aside. "Is that true, that you don't think you can love?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I haven't loved since my mother died," he finally said. "But since you've been in my life—" He trailed off, struggling with emotions he'd spent years suppressing. "I'm terrified, Sarah, because if I let myself feel this and you leave, I don't think I'll survive it." Sarah saw in that moment the vulnerable man beneath the billionaire's armor. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. But the complications kept coming. 2 months into their relationship, Sarah discovered something that shattered her understanding of Marcus entirely. She'd used his tablet and his email notifications popped up. One from a law firm caught her eye. Child Support Settlement. Emma Mitchell. Her stomach dropped. When Marcus emerged from his conference call, Sarah confronted him. "Why is there a legal document about Emma with your lawyers?" Marcus's face went carefully blank. "Sarah, did you do something to her? Did you—" She couldn't even articulate the fear blooming in her chest. "No." Marcus's voice was sharp. "Nothing like that. Sit down. I need to tell you something." What he revealed made Sarah's entire worldview shift. When Sarah had first broken down at the restaurant, Marcus's curiosity wasn't entirely random. His mother had been a single mother as well, struggling to make ends meet while raising him alone. Before she died, she'd made Marcus promise to help women in situations like hers. But Emma's medical situation had triggered something deeper in Marcus. His private investigators had looked into Sarah's background, something he'd never admitted, and discovered that Emma's biological father, Thomas Brenner, had come into a significant inheritance just 2 months prior. He'd been deliberately avoiding child support payments, despite legally owing them. Marcus, in a move that was both protective and controlling, had taken it upon himself to pursue the legal claim on Sarah's behalf. "I should have told you," Marcus said, seeing the betrayal in her eyes. "I know that. Oh, I made a unilateral decision about your life and your daughter's life without your consent. That was wrong." Sarah's emotions were a chaotic tangle: gratitude that Marcus had taken action, and fury that he'd done so without her knowledge or permission. "She's my daughter," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "My responsibility, my choice." I know," Marcus said, "and I'm sorry. I was trying to protect you both, but I was really just being the same controlling person I've always been. I saw something I could fix, and I fixed it without thinking about the fact that you might need to be part of that decision. It was a vulnerability that Sarah hadn't expected from him, and it forced her to confront her own assumptions. Marcus wasn't a savior. He was a flawed man with power and money, sometimes using those tools in helpful ways and sometimes in ways that overstepped. The settlement went forward. Emma's father, facing legal action, agreed to pay back support and ongoing child support. The money was significant, enough to secure Emma's future in ways Sarah had never imagined. But it also raised a question that Sarah couldn't quite ignore. Was she with Marcus because she loved him, or because he represented security and stability for her daughter? The question haunted her until one evening when Marcus came home and found Sarah in the kitchen making pasta sauce, a simple activity that reminded her of who she'd been before money and billionaires entered her life. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I'm thinking about the night we met," Sarah said, "when I was crying on the floor of that restaurant and you offered to help. I've wondered ever since if I only fell for you because of what you could provide." Marcus turned her around to face him. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters. Why? We can't change the past. We can only decide what we want moving forward." Sarah looked at this complicated, flawed, incredibly generous man and realized something fundamental. She loved him, not because of his money or what he could provide, but despite it. She loved his vulnerability hidden beneath the armor, his capacity for genuine kindness, his willingness to change when confronted with his mistakes. "I love you," she said, "not the billionaire version, the real version, the one who's learning to feel again." Marcus kissed her, and Sarah felt something settle inside her, a rightness that transcended circumstances and explanations. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching them, and that person had plans to tear them apart. The woman's name was Catherine Thorne, and she'd been systematically destroying lives for the past decade. She was a freelance investigative journalist with a secondary career as a corporate saboteur, someone who used intimate knowledge of powerful people's secrets to manipulate outcomes that benefited her mysteriously wealthy employer. She'd brought down 3 CEOs, destroyed 2 marriages of prominent politicians, and had never been caught. Her current target, Marcus Sterling. Catherine had been hired by someone within Sterling's organization to uncover compromising information about Marcus that could be used to force his resignation. Her investigation had been thorough and fruitful. What she'd discovered was that Marcus's mother hadn't simply been a single mother doing her best. She'd been a maid who'd had an affair with a married man, Marcus's biological father, a prominent businessman who'd denied paternity and abandoned them both. Marcus's mother had struggled not just with poverty, but with the shame of her situation, and had eventually taken her own life when Marcus was 18. Marcus's official story, that she died of cancer, was a lie. And that lie, Catherine had learned, was the cornerstone of his entire identity and his wealth distribution philosophy. But there was more. Catherine's investigation had also uncovered that Marcus had once paid for the silence of a former employee who'd accused him of workplace harassment. The woman had signed an NDA in exchange for $1 million settlement. Catherine knew that releasing both pieces of information strategically would devastate Marcus. But she also knew something else. He was in love with Sarah Mitchell, and Sarah didn't know any of it. Catherine's employer wanted Marcus destroyed, but Catherine had learned to think several moves ahead. If she destroyed Marcus directly, he might recover. He had the resources to weather a scandal. But if she destroyed his relationship with Sarah first, his emotional foundation would crumble. Then, when the scandal hit, he would have no one to lean on. It was elegant, really. Cruel, certainly, but elegant. Catherine arranged an accidental encounter with Sarah at a boutique in Soho. She was a master at building rapport, at making people trust her. Within 30 minutes, she and Sarah were having coffee, and Catherine was carefully, expertly planting seeds of doubt. "It's so rare to see genuine wealth paired with genuine humility," Catherine mused. "Marcus Sterling is unusual, though I suppose anyone who's made his fortune through the kind of aggressive tactics he's known for would have to be complicated." Sarah, still relatively naive about Marcus's business practices, asked what she meant. "Oh, I probably shouldn't," Catherine said, looking troubled. "But you should know what you're getting into. Sterling is brilliant, but he's not ethical. He's been sued multiple times for workplace harassment. There was a woman several years ago. The settlement was substantial and covered by an NDA, and his mother." Catherine paused dramatically. "What about his mother?" Sarah asked, her concern mounting. "She didn't die of cancer. She died by suicide. Marcus has built this whole narrative about being raised by a noble single mother, but the truth is darker. He's been marketing that pain for sympathetic PR for years." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She wanted to dismiss Catherine as a liar, but something in the way information was delivered, with apparent reluctance, with credible detail, made it seem plausible. "I'm sorry," Catherine said, touching Sarah's arm. "I shouldn't have said anything. Forget I mentioned it. I'm sure Marcus will explain if you ask him." But Sarah didn't ask Marcus. Instead, she went home that evening and spent hours on her laptop searching. What she found, pieces of it anyway, seemed to confirm Catherine's story. There were references to workplace settlements, though details were limited due to NDAs. And her mother's death was indeed a suicide, though Marcus had publicly stated it was cancer. The betrayal felt enormous. Marcus had built his entire philanthropic persona on the tragedy of his mother, using her death as justification for his mission to help struggling women. But if he'd lied about the cause, what else had he lied about? When Marcus came home late that evening, Sarah was waiting for him, her emotions a volatile mixture of hurt and anger. "Your mother didn't die of cancer," she said without preamble. "She killed herself, and you lied about it." Marcus's face went pale. He sank onto the couch. "Who told you? Does it matter? Is it true?" "Yes," Marcus said quietly. "It's true. I was 18. I came home and found her. She'd taken too many pills. I should have seen it coming. She'd been depressed for years, but I was too absorbed in my own teenage problems to notice. I was selfish and oblivious, and by the time I realized how much pain she was in, it was too late." "Why did you lie about it?" Sarah demanded. "Because the truth is shameful," Marcus said. "Because when I started my company, I needed people to believe I understood struggle, not that I was the product of family dysfunction and my own negligence. Because creating a narrative of maternal sacrifice was better for my brand than admitting the truth, that my mother suffered and I failed to save her." Sarah wanted to hold onto her anger, wanted to use it as a shield against the vulnerability his honesty created. But she could see the genuine pain on Marcus's face, the way he was finally allowing himself to grieve the mother he'd lost over 2 decades ago. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "A woman accused me of harassment about 5 years ago. I didn't do what she said, but I was difficult to work with, demanding, cold, borderline abusive in how I treated my staff. She had legitimate complaints about my behavior, even if the specific accusation wasn't accurate. I paid her to go away rather than face it." Sarah sat down heavily. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to know the worst parts of me," Marcus said. "Because I realized that I've been running from my mother's death my entire adult life, using wealth and charity to convince myself that I'm a good person. But good people don't hide their pain and lies. They own their mistakes." It was the moment everything could have fallen apart. But looking at him, truly looking at him, she saw a man who was finally becoming honest with himself. "I forgive you," she said, "but I need you to be real with me from now on. No more secrets, no more protective lies, just the truth." "I can do that," Marcus said. What neither of them knew was that Catherine had been watching from across the street, monitoring their argument through a hired spy. She'd hoped the relationship would explode, but instead Sarah and Marcus seemed to have deepened their connection through honest conversation. Catherine smiled coldly. They weren't done yet. The next crisis came from an unexpected direction. Marcus's company, Sterling Industries, received a cease and desist letter from a competitor claiming that Marcus had stolen proprietary technology during an acquisition 6 years ago. The accusation wasn't new. It had been quietly settled at the time, but someone had leaked the details to the media. Within hours, business news outlets were running the story. Sterling billionaire accused of industrial espionage. By evening, 3 board members had called for Marcus to step down temporarily, while an investigation cleared his name. Marcus was furious and confused. This settlement was sealed, he told Sarah that night. No one should even know about it. As they dug deeper, they discovered that someone had actively worked to unseal the documents and leak them strategically. Someone with knowledge of how to manipulate media cycles and legal proceedings. Someone professional. Sarah, remembering her conversation with Catherine, made a decision. She reached out to a journalist friend from her college days and asked if Catherine Thorne's name meant anything to him. His response chilled her. Catherine Thorne was known in investigative circles as someone who worked in the shadows, someone hired to uncover information that could be weaponized. No one had ever proven she worked unethically, but the pattern of her appearing before scandals broke was well documented. Sarah confronted Marcus with this information. "I think someone is deliberately targeting you, and I think it's connected to someone who approached me and told me things about your past." Marcus went very still. "What things?" Sarah told him about Catherine, about the claims regarding his mother, about the harassment settlement. She watched Marcus's face cycle through emotions, surprise, betrayal, and finally, a resigned acceptance. "I need to tell you something else," Marcus said, "something I haven't even told my closest advisors." He took Sarah to his private study. Inside, he accessed a secure server and pulled up files, legal documents, emails, and medical records. "There's another reason someone might want to destroy me," Marcus said, "and it has to do with my company's true structure." What he revealed shocked Sarah. Sterling Industries wasn't just a tech and hospitality conglomerate. It was a front for Marcus's real passion, a secretive operation that identified and prosecuted international human trafficking rings. Marcus had been working with federal agencies, using his wealth and intelligence infrastructure to hunt predators. "Why would you hide this?" Sarah asked, overwhelmed. "Because it makes me a target," Marcus said simply. "I've helped bring down 43 trafficking operations over the past 8 years. The people involved in those networks have powerful connections. I've received threats. Some of my security team have been attacked. This is why I was so controlled about relationships before you. This is why I tried to isolate you." Sarah understood then the full scope of the danger Marcus had brought into her life. His enemies weren't just corporate rivals. They were criminals with everything to lose. "We need to go to the authorities," Sarah said. "We need to tell them about Catherine." "We can try," Marcus said. "But Catherine is a ghost. She's incredibly careful, and she works for someone. Finding her isn't going to solve the real problem." The real problem was that someone powerful wanted Marcus Sterling neutralized, and they'd found the perfect pressure point: Sarah. The threat came subtly at first. Emma's school called to report that someone had been asking questions about her schedule. Sarah's apartment building reported someone attempting to access her apartment while she was at work. Small incursions, designed to create fear without crossing obvious legal lines. Marcus's response was immediate and comprehensive. He hired a full security team, moved Sarah and Emma to a safe house, and restricted their movements. Sarah, who'd been struggling for years to reclaim her independence, suddenly found herself imprisoned by luxury. "This is for your protection," Marcus kept saying. "This is a cage," Sarah replied. They had their first real fight. Marcus wanted to control every aspect of Sarah's life to keep her safe. Sarah wanted autonomy and agency, even if it meant accepting risk. "I can't live like this," she told him. "I can't raise Emma in fear, locked away like she's in prison. She's supposed to be 6 years old and going to school and having friends. Instead, she's asking why she can't go outside. Because I can't protect you if you won't let me," Marcus said, his desperation evident. "I don't want to be protected," Sarah said. "I want to be a partner." The separation, when it came, wasn't dramatic. Sarah simply told Marcus she needed space to think, and he, respecting her wishes for the first time, let her go. She took Emma and moved in with her college friend in Queens. It was smaller, less luxurious, but it was real. Emma could play in the apartment complex's courtyard. Sarah could go to work without an entourage. And Marcus, for the first time, was truly alone with his pain. The tabloids had a field day. Every detail of Sarah's background was dragged into the light. Her struggles were weaponized. Her daughter's medical history was discussed by strangers on the internet. Sarah called Marcus after the worst article was published. He sounded broken. "I'm sorry," he said. "I've destroyed your privacy. I've made you a target. You should never have gotten involved with me." "I made my own choices," Sarah said, and meant it. "The question is, what are we going to do about the person who's actually orchestrating this?" "I'm working on it," Marcus said. "My team has been tracking Catherine. But she's good, Sarah. She's very, very good." What neither of them realized was that the final phase of Catherine's plan was already in motion, and it would force them to confront the deepest questions about love, loyalty, and what they were truly willing to sacrifice for each other. The evidence arrived at Sarah's workplace anonymously, delivered by courier in an unmarked envelope. Inside were photographs, explicit, graphic photographs, of Marcus with a woman who was clearly not Sarah. The photos were dated from 2 years ago, before Marcus and Sarah had met. What mattered was that Catherine had somehow obtained them, digitally aged them using AI technology to make them appear recent, and was prepared to release them to the media with claims that Marcus had been unfaithful while in a committed relationship. Sarah knew it was a lie. The timestamps on the original files, which her tech-savvy co-worker helped her verify, proved the images were old. But a lie, repeated often enough and loudly enough, could destroy a relationship regardless of truth. That was when Sarah realized Catherine wasn't trying to destroy Marcus's career. She was trying to destroy his ability to love. She was weaponizing intimacy itself. Sarah called Marcus that night, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Someone sent me photographs," she said. "False evidence of infidelity. They're going to use this to try to break us apart." She heard Marcus's sharp intake of breath. "Sarah, listen to me. Don't believe anything you're told about me right now. Whatever evidence someone presents, it's fabricated. I've been faithful to you since the night we met." "I know," Sarah said. "But that doesn't matter to the rest of the world, does it? Your reputation is already damaged by the industrial espionage leak. If this comes out, then we'll face it together," Marcus said. "We'll release the file metadata. We'll prove it's false. We'll what?" Sarah asked bitterly. "Convince people that billionaires can be faithful? That's not a narrative anyone wants to believe." The crack in her voice was real, though. Not because she doubted Marcus, but because she was exhausted. Emma was struggling emotionally from the separation. Sarah's work had become complicated because of the media attention. Her mother's grave, something she visited for peace, had been photographed by tabloid reporters. "I need you," Marcus said simply. "I know," Sarah replied. "And I need me. I need to take care of my daughter. I need to have a life that isn't defined by your enemies." But even as she said it, Sarah knew that separating from Marcus wasn't going to solve anything. Catherine and whoever was paying her didn't care about Sarah's peace. They cared about Marcus's destruction. And as long as Sarah was emotionally important to him, she was leverage. The next morning, Catherine herself made contact. She appeared at Sarah's office building, stylishly dressed, carrying coffee, an olive branch, and a threat simultaneously. Sarah's security team moved to remove her, but Sarah told them to stand down. "I want to talk," Catherine said. They sat in a coffee shop 3 blocks away, sufficiently public that Catherine wouldn't try anything overtly threatening. "You're very effective," Sarah said without preamble. "I'll give you that." Catherine smiled. "Thank you. It's a compliment I don't get often, because most people don't realize what I'm doing until it's too late." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why are you so invested in destroying Marcus?" "I'm not invested in destroying him," Catherine said. "My employer is. I'm merely a tool. I'm very good at being a tool." "Who's your employer?" Catherine laughed. "If I told you that, I'd be useless to them, and they'd kill me. You understand? It's the same principle that makes you valuable to Marcus. As long as you're emotionally important to him, as long as he's willing to compromise his judgment to protect you, he's vulnerable." Sarah felt ice slide down her spine. "What do you want?" "I want you to leave him," Catherine said simply. "Publicly, dramatically. Tell the media that you discovered his infidelity, that you can't trust him, that your daughter's well-being depends on you walking away. If you do that, my employer will leave you both alone. The leaks will stop. The photos won't be released. You get your life back." "And if I don't?" Sarah asked. "Then we escalate," Catherine said pleasantly. "Your daughter's school learns that her father is a criminal. It doesn't matter that it's false. It will ruin her socially. Your apartment building is informed that a resident is harboring fugitives. Again, false, but she'll have to move. We can make your life very uncomfortable, Sarah. We can make Emma's life very uncomfortable. Or you can simply leave Marcus, and everyone gets to move on." Sarah wanted to refuse immediately. She wanted to be noble and strong. But she was also a mother, and a mother's primary instinct is protection. "I need time to think," she said. "You have 48 hours, Catherine replied. "After that, I'll assume you've made your choice, and we'll proceed with our original plan." Sarah called Marcus that evening, but she didn't tell him about Catherine's ultimatum. Instead, she told him she'd made a decision. "I think we need to end this," she said, the words tasting like poison. "I think we both got caught up in something that isn't sustainable. You're going to be embroiled in these scandals for years, and Emma and I don't deserve to be collateral damage." She heard the devastation in his silence. "Sarah, no," he started. "It's done," she said, and hung up. Within hours, Sarah's story was leaked to the media. By the next morning, it was the lead story on every business news outlet. Sarah followed Catherine's script perfectly. She gave an interview to a carefully selected journalist, discussing her concerns about Marcus's fidelity without providing specifics. She posted on social media about the importance of protecting her daughter from toxic situations. She made herself a sympathetic figure, and it worked. The narrative shifted. Instead of being destroyed by association with Marcus, Sarah became the victim of his excesses. There was talk of a book deal, a movie option. Sarah had won. She was safe. Emma was safe, and she was absolutely, completely alone. She'd sacrificed her relationship to keep her daughter safe. She'd allowed herself to become the instrument of Marcus's destruction. And she was living in a beautiful apartment paid for by Marcus's money. Money he'd transferred to an account in Sarah's name before their breakup, ensuring that Emma's future was secure regardless of what happened next. The cruelest part was that she still loved him. Every night she wanted to call him. But Catherine's threat hung over her head. Any contact would begin the escalation. What she didn't know was that Marcus was far from giving up. He had resources and intelligence capabilities that far exceeded Catherine's understanding. The game was far from over. It was only entering its most dangerous phase. Marcus Sterling had spent his entire adult life learning to be ruthless in pursuit of his goals, but nothing in his professional life had prepared him for the calculated destruction of his personal world. When Sarah ended their relationship, Marcus had a choice. He could accept it as a natural consequence of his complicated life, or he could fight. His nature, honed by decades of warfare in boardrooms and courtrooms, chose to fight, but not immediately. Marcus understood the importance of strategic patience. For 3 weeks, he let Sarah settle into her carefully constructed narrative. He allowed her to do her interviews, post her social media statements, and establish herself as a sympathetic figure. He didn't attempt contact, didn't leak counter-narratives, didn't use his media connections to undermine her story. Instead, he worked quietly with his security team and his contacts in federal law enforcement to identify his enemy. The investigation into Catherine Thorne was intricate and required accessing security footage from multiple locations and financial records. But Marcus had cultivated relationships with federal agents who believed in his mission to combat trafficking, and they were willing to bend procedural rules for someone who'd given them the tools to save hundreds of lives. What they discovered was illuminating. Catherine Thorne was indeed a ghost, but ghosts leave traces if you know how to look for them. She had a legitimate passport registered to her legal name, Cynthia Thornton. She had bank accounts, a series of rented apartments, and a credit card that created a paper trail. And following that trail led directly to her employer, Richard Ashford, CEO of Ashford Technologies, and the brother of Marcus's ex-fiancée, Victoria. Richard had been attempting to acquire Sterling Industries for the past 4 years. When Marcus refused to sell, Richard had become obsessed with forcing a sale through blackmail and reputation destruction. Victoria, for her part, had provided Richard with intimate knowledge of Marcus's vulnerabilities, his emotional isolation, his single mother trauma, his secret operations. She'd also introduced him to Catherine. But what Richard hadn't anticipated was that Marcus would eventually trace the conspiracy back to him. Marcus arranged a meeting with federal investigators and Richard's company's board. Within 12 hours, Richard Ashford was arrested on charges of conspiracy, attempted extortion, and computer fraud. Victoria was subpoenaed to appear before a grand jury. Catherine Thorne, receiving word that her employer was compromised, did what professionals always do. She disappeared, her carefully constructed life abandoned within hours. But Marcus didn't care about Catherine anymore. She was a symptom, not the disease. What mattered now was Sarah, and saving what he'd nearly lost. Marcus had spent years learning to manipulate information, to shape narratives, to make people believe what he wanted them to believe. It was time to use those skills for something that actually mattered. He arranged for the evidence of Catherine's manipulation, the proof of Richard's conspiracy, and the timeline of coordinated attacks to be leaked to the media. But he didn't do it as a counter-narrative about Sarah. Instead, he did something bolder. He had his representatives contact Sarah with a full accounting of what had actually happened. They offered her a choice. She could release the story herself, positioning herself as the victim of a coordinated attack, or Marcus's team would release it without her involvement. Either way, Catherine's manipulation would be exposed. Sarah called Marcus directly when she received the news. "Is this real?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Every word," Marcus said. Catherine was hired by Richard Ashford. The real danger was from Richard's corporate ambitions. He's been arrested, Catherine has disappeared, and you and Emma are actually safe. Sarah sat down heavily. "I left you over a threat that was partially fabricated." "A threat that was real enough," Marcus said gently. "I pushed you into a dangerous situation through my own choices. Catherine exploited that. We were both played by someone with significant resources and no ethical boundaries. "What do you want me to do?" Sarah asked. "I want you to decide what's true for you," Marcus said. "Not what Catherine told you was true, not what the media said was true, but what your heart knows to be true. Do you still love me?" The question hung in the air between them. "Yes," Sarah finally whispered. "God help me, but I do." "Then come home," Marcus said. "We'll do this together. We'll rebuild. We'll be smarter about protecting what we have, but we won't hide anymore, and we won't let fear dictate our choices." Emma had asked about Marcus several times since Sarah had left him. Children were intuitive creatures, and Emma had sensed that something important had been taken from both her and her mother. When Sarah told Emma that she would be seeing Marcus again, the 6-year-old's face lit up with joy so pure that Sarah felt tears stream down her face. They moved back into Marcus's penthouse apartment that weekend. The media coverage was extensive, but this time the narrative was entirely different. Instead of being a story about a woman who'd escaped a toxic relationship, it became a story about two people who'd been manipulated by a corporate conspiracy and who'd found their way back to each other. The public, it seemed, loved that narrative even more. Romance, corruption, justice, and redemption. It had all the elements of compelling storytelling. But Marcus and Sarah were less interested in how the media portrayed their story and more interested in actually living it. They spent the first week simply being together as a family. They took Emma to the park, prepared meals in their shared kitchen, and rebuilt the daily rhythms that had been disrupted by crisis and separation. At night, after Emma was asleep, they talked for hours. Real conversations, not superficial ones. The kind that build intimacy through vulnerability. "I don't want to hide anymore," Marcus said one evening as they sat on the terrace overlooking the city. "About my mother, about my past, about what my company actually does. I want to live openly." "That's going to be complicated," Sarah said. "Your anti-trafficking work will become more visible. You'll face additional threats." "I know," Marcus said, "but I'd rather face them with you than avoid them alone." Sarah took his hand. "We'll figure it out together." What they didn't realize was that their declaration of openness and their public reunion would set events in motion that would test them even more profoundly. Because someone had been watching the investigation into Richard Ashford, and that person had a very personal interest in seeing Marcus Sterling completely destroyed. 2 months after their reunion, Marcus received a letter delivered by courier with instructions that it be given to Marcus personally. His security team scanned it before allowing him to open it. The letter was from his biological father. Thomas Sterling Sr. had followed Marcus's life from a distance for 36 years. He'd seen the boy born to the maid. He'd watched the man build an empire. He'd observed the recent public drama with interest, and finally, a desire for contact. The letter explained that Thomas was dying, cancer, advanced stage, and wanted to meet his son before the end. He wanted, after 3 decades of silence, to have a conversation. Marcus's first instinct was to refuse. The man had abandoned his mother, had denied paternity, had allowed Sarah and countless other women to suffer financial hardship while he lived comfortably with his legitimate family. Meeting him would feel like a betrayal. But Marcus was also learning, through his relationship with Sarah, that grudges were a form of poison that primarily hurt the person carrying them. He agreed to meet. Thomas Sterling Sr. was smaller than Marcus expected, diminished by illness, but his eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had created the Sterling business fortune. They met in Thomas's apartment, a modest place for a man of his wealth, almost monastic in its simplicity. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness," Thomas said immediately. "I was a coward when you were born. I was married to a woman I didn't love, financially entangled with family expectations, and I couldn't face the responsibility of an illegitimate child." So I chose denial and abandonment, and I've regretted it every single day of my life." Marcus listened, his emotions a complex tangle of anger and unexpected sympathy. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," Thomas continued. "Smart, funny, kind. I loved her for the 3 months I was with her, and I continued to love her after I walked away. When she died—" Thomas's voice broke. "I deserved to lose her. I deserved to carry that guilt." "Why are you telling me this now?" Marcus asked. "Because I need you to understand something," Thomas said. "The man who hired Catherine Thorne, Richard Ashford, he didn't act in isolation. He had support from my family. My legitimate son, your half-brother, was part of the conspiracy." Marcus felt the world shift. "Christopher was involved?" "He wanted to force you out of Sterling Industries," Thomas said. "He believed the company should belong to the legitimate line, not an illegitimate son. And when you started your anti-trafficking operations, he became convinced you were using company resources for something nefarious. He wanted to destroy your reputation and acquire the company." Gee, the revelation was devastating. Marcus had a half-brother he'd never met, and that half-brother had participated in orchestrating his destruction. "Christopher doesn't know I'm telling you this," Thomas continued, "but I have lucid moments, and I've realized I'm facing my own death with the same cowardice I faced your existence. I'm not going to repeat that pattern." Marcus didn't speak for a long time. Then finally he asked, "Why should I believe you?" Thomas pulled out a folder and handed it to Marcus. Inside were documents, emails, financial transfers, meeting notes that proved Christopher's participation in Richard's scheme. "Christopher is in Hong Kong right now," Thomas said. "He's meeting with an investor who's willing to fund a hostile takeover of Sterling Industries. If you wait, he'll attempt it. You can stop him now with this evidence, but you'll burn the bridge with your half-brother permanently. Or you can confront him, hear his perspective, and make a choice about forgiveness." "Why would he want forgiveness?" Marcus asked. "He tried to destroy me." "Because he's your brother," Thomas said simply. "And family, for better or worse, is worth understanding." Marcus left his father's apartment with the folder and a weight on his shoulders that felt nearly unbearable. He'd spent his entire life believing he was alone, and now he was being told that he had family. Complicated, flawed family, but family nonetheless. He didn't go home to Sarah that evening. Instead, he went to his office and spent the night reviewing the evidence against his half-brother. By 5 a.m., he'd made a decision. He called Christopher and asked him to meet. Christopher Sterling, Jr. looked like Marcus. They had the same bone structure, the same dark hair and sharp features. But where Marcus carried himself with controlled confidence, Christopher radiated desperation and bitterness. "I wondered when he'd betray me," Christopher said immediately, sinking into the chair across from Marcus. "Dad, I mean. He never could keep a secret." "Tell me why," Marcus said simply, and Christopher told a story that, while it didn't justify his actions, at least explained them. Christopher had grown up believing he would inherit Sterling Industries. He'd been groomed since childhood to take over the company, prepared to follow in his father's footsteps, shaped into the image of a successor. Then, at age 25, he'd learned the truth. His father had an illegitimate son who'd built a more successful company entirely on his own. For Christopher, it was the ultimate rejection. His father's ambitions, his careful planning, his entire identity was built on the assumption of inheritance. And suddenly, that inheritance seemed less important than the accident of Marcus's birth. "I didn't think you were the villain," Christopher said. "I thought you were the spoiled billionaire who'd been handed everything through luck. I thought I deserved what you had." "And now?" Marcus asked. "Now I know you built everything yourself. And I know I'm a failure who tried to take what wasn't mine because I'm too cowardly to build something of my own." The confession was raw and genuine, and Marcus found something unexpected stirring in his chest. Compassion. "You're not a failure," Marcus said. "You're someone who made bad choices out of fear and insecurity. That's human. That's fixable." "Are you going to have me arrested?" Christopher asked. Marcus thought about his father, dying in that sparse apartment, trying to make peace with his guilt. He thought about Sarah, who taught him that forgiveness was more powerful than revenge. He thought about his mother, who'd suffered because of Christopher's father's cowardice. "No," Marcus said finally, "but you're going to help me understand what you learned about my company during your research. And you're going to explain to the federal authorities exactly what you discovered about Richard's operation. And then you're going to disappear for a while. Take some time. Build something. Become someone you're proud of." "That's all?" Christopher asked, clearly expecting harsher punishment. "That's all," Marcus confirmed. "But if I ever learn you've repeated these actions, I won't be so lenient." Christopher agreed to cooperate fully with the authorities. The additional evidence he provided helped federal investigators dismantle a corporate corruption network that extended far beyond Richard Ashford's company. By cooperating, Christopher not only avoided prison time, but also earned himself a reputation as a whistleblower, which actually helped rehabilitate his professional standing. When Marcus finally went home to Sarah, she was waiting for him, having sensed something major had occurred. He told her everything, about his father, about Christopher, about the discovery of family he'd never known existed. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, running her hands through his hair as they lay in bed. "That's a lot to process." "I had 3 days left with my father before he died," Marcus said softly. "We talked about my mother, about the things he regretted, about why he'd been afraid, and we made peace. He left me a letter asking me to forgive Christopher, asking me to try to build something with the family I have, rather than focus on the family I lost." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to?" "I think so," Marcus said. "It's going to take time, but I think maybe that's the whole point. Love isn't a destination. It's a journey of choosing the same people over and over again, even when they disappoint you." As Sarah held Marcus in the darkness, she realized that they'd both grown in ways neither of them could have anticipated. The crisis that had threatened to destroy them had instead transformed them into more complete versions of themselves. What they didn't know was that the final test of their love was still waiting for them. A test that would force them to make an impossible choice between their hearts and their values. Emma turned 7 the week after Thomas Sterling Sr. passed away. Marcus channeled his grief into creating something meaningful, a foundation in his mother's name, dedicated to supporting the children of trafficking victims and providing them with educational opportunities. Emma, too young to understand the full weight of death, understood that Marcus was sad, and with the simple logic of children, she attempted to cheer him up by dragging him to her ballet recital, by showing him drawings she'd made, by declaring that she loved him more than the entire world. Sarah watched this relationship deepen with a mixture of joy and trepidation. Emma called Marcus Dad now, a natural progression that Marcus had never discouraged. And Marcus treated Emma as he would a biological daughter, with fierce protective love and genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings. It was this that made what came next so devastating. Thomas Sterling Sr.'s will was read 6 weeks after his death, and its contents stunned everyone. Thomas had left the bulk of his estate, roughly $800 million plus controlling interest in several companies, to Marcus. But he'd also included a condition. Marcus could inherit the money only if he agreed to officially acknowledge his relationship with Christopher and publicly forgive the actions taken against him. It seemed like a reasonable condition, and Marcus was prepared to agree until his lawyers told him about a second clause. The second clause required Marcus to step down as CEO of Sterling Industries and cede control to Christopher. It was a test, they explained. A test of Marcus's values. A test of whether he would choose love for his half-brother over his own ambition. Marcus called a family meeting, Sarah, Emma, and Christopher. He explained the contents of the will without editorializing. "It's your choice," Sarah said when he'd finished. "What do you want to do?" "I want to keep my company," Marcus said honestly. "I've built it. I care about what we do, the work against trafficking, the hospitality initiatives, the technology development. I don't want to hand it over to Christopher." "I don't want it," Christopher said immediately. "Dad knew I didn't want it. He knew I was too broken to run a company of that magnitude. This was his final guilt trip, trying to make me feel like I was being given this chance, when really he was just perpetuating the cycle of obligation and disappointment." "Then don't accept it," Marcus said. "And what? You decline the $800 million and the legacy?" Christopher shook his head. "That defeats the whole point of his test." Sarah had been quiet, thinking. Now she spoke. "What if the test isn't about the money or the company? What if it's about what you both choose to do when faced with an impossible choice?" Emma, sitting between her mother and Marcus, asked innocently, "Why is it impossible? Just don't take the money." Marcus looked at his 7-year-old daughter, and something shifted in his perspective. "She's right," he said slowly. "It is just that simple. I can choose my company and choose my integrity. And I can choose to forgive Christopher anyway, not because my father guilted me into it, but because I genuinely want to." "But the $800 million, Christopher protested. "The foundation, the anti-trafficking work, all of it could be expanded exponentially with that kind of capital." "Yes," Marcus agreed, "and there will be other opportunities. Other sources of funding. The real test wasn't about whether I'd sell my soul for money or for forgiveness. It was about whether I understood that I could have integrity without conditions attached to it." He turned to Christopher. "I forgive you, not because my father asked me to, but because I've learned that carrying grudges only poisons myself, and I'm not stepping down from Sterling Industries. But if you want to rebuild your relationship with me, you're welcome to do so, as my brother, not as my successor." Christopher's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve that." "No," Marcus agreed. "I don't deserve Sarah either, and yet here she is. We don't earn these relationships, we're given them. The question is just what we choose to do with them." The decision to decline the inheritance made headlines. Billionaire refuses 800 metric tons inheritance over values. The media narrative praised Marcus's integrity. Financial analysts debated the decision for weeks. But what mattered to Marcus was that he'd made a choice that aligned with who he wanted to be. What mattered was that Sarah looked at him with admiration and love. What mattered was that Emma was proud of her dad. And what mattered was that when Christopher eventually rebuilt his life, starting a non-profit that provided business education to formerly incarcerated individuals, he was doing it not because he was obligated by inheritance, but because he'd found genuine purpose. The family that had been fractured across 3 decades was slowly, carefully being knitted back together. One evening, about 8 months after the will was read, Sarah and Marcus were lying in bed, Emma sleeping peacefully in her room next door. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Not taking the money? It could have changed so much." "No," Marcus said, "but I'm curious. Do you regret being with me? You gave up normalcy. You've been dragged through media scandals. You're raising a child with a man whose past is complicated and whose present is chaotic." Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about her journey. From a crying woman scrubbing floors at 3 a.m. to a woman loved by one of the world's most powerful men. From desperation to stability. From isolation to family. "I don't regret it," she said honestly. "We've built something beautiful, and it's built on a foundation of genuine knowing and genuine choosing. Every year, when I wake up and choose you again, it means more." "I choose you," Marcus said simply, "not because you need saving, not because circumstances have aligned, but because you are the most extraordinary person I've ever known. Because you make me want to be better, because I genuinely cannot imagine my life without you in it." Ooh, Sarah rolled over to face him in the darkness. "Say that again in 10 years. Say that when Emma's in college and our lives are boring and normal. Say that when we're just two ordinary people trying to build an ordinary life together." "I will," Marcus promised. "Because the extraordinary part isn't what we've survived. It's that we chose each other over and over again, even when we could have walked away." And Sarah, hearing the genuine certainty in his voice, believed him. 15 years after that first 3 a.m. meeting, Sarah and Marcus sat on the porch of their Connecticut home, watching sunset settle into the landscape. Emma was home from Columbia University, working on a grant application for her nonprofit. Their younger daughter, Lily, was inside, helping her mother prepare dinner. The house smelled like roasted vegetables and fresh bread, and the evening was suffused with the kind of contentment that comes from truly knowing what you have. "Do you remember," Marcus asked, taking Sarah's hand, "when you told me that you needed me to say I would choose you again in 10 years, when things were boring and ordinary?" "Of course," Sarah said. "I was terrified that we would fall apart once the crisis ended." "Did we?" Marcus asked. "No," Sarah admitted. "We became stronger. The extraordinary part was building a life that could sustain itself through ordinary moments." Marcus leaned over and kissed her forehead. "I choose you, every day, in all the ways the traditional vows say it, but also in every small moment, choosing you when I'm tired, choosing you when you challenge me, choosing you when I could theoretically choose someone more complicated. I choose you because you are my home." Sarah was quiet for a moment, feeling the weight of these words and the truth behind them. "I have something for you," she said, pulling out a worn notebook. It was the journal she'd started on the night after they met, a record of her thoughts, her fears, her gradual realization that she was falling in love with the man who'd offered her help. "I've been reading this to Lily," Sarah said, "telling her the story of how her father and I came to be. And I realized something. The story isn't about a billionaire saving a poor woman. The story is about two broken people finding each other and choosing to heal together." Marcus opened the journal, reading Sarah's words from 15 years ago, seeing his own journey reflected in her observations. He saw the moment he began to believe in love again. He saw the way she documented his growth and struggles with transparent honesty. "I want people to know this story," Sarah said. "This. Not as inspiration porn, but as a real account of how two very different people navigated class differences, trauma, and the hard work of building genuine connection. I want to write it. I want to publish it. And I want you to be a part of that process." "Our story," Marcus said softly. "Our story," Sarah confirmed. Over the next year, Sarah and Marcus collaborated on a book, a true account of their relationship that was unflinching about the complications and equally unflinching about the joy. They published it through an independent press, with the profits going to Sarah's foundation and Marcus's anti-trafficking work. The book became unexpectedly successful. Readers were hungry for a story that acknowledged the real complications of love across class lines, while also refusing to engage in self-pity or martyr narratives. Sarah and Marcus became minor celebrities on the speaking circuit, talking about relationship building, class dynamics, and the way trauma could either destroy love or deepen it, depending on the choices people made. But they were careful to maintain their privacy where it mattered. Emma and Lily's lives remained largely private. Their home remained a sanctuary rather than a stage for their public personas. 20 years after that first meeting, Sarah's foundation had transformed the lives of over 5,000 women. Marcus's anti-trafficking work had resulted in the prosecution of over 300 traffickers and the rescue of nearly 1,000 victims. Emma's organization was expanding internationally, and Lily, now 15 years old, was already talking about studying criminal justice with an emphasis on victim advocacy. The family, blended, complicated, beautiful, had become a unit that was greater than any of its individual parts. One evening, Marcus was in his study reviewing reports from the foundation when he found himself thinking about the man he'd been before Sarah entered his life. That Marcus, successful, wealthy, but utterly alone, felt like a different person entirely. He'd been a man who believed that emotion was weakness. Sarah had taught him differently. Every day for 20 years, she'd taught him that vulnerability was strength, that needing people was one of life's greatest gifts, and that real power came from the ability to love and be loved. He called her into his office, and she came readily. After 2 decades together, they still moved toward each other like that. A habitual return, a gravitational pull that hadn't diminished with time. "I was just thinking," Marcus said, pulling her onto his lap, "about how grateful I am. Not for the good things that have happened, though I'm grateful for those too, but for the difficulties. For the way you challenged me. For the way you refused to be saved or owned. For the way you insisted on building your own life alongside mine, not as a subsidiary, but as a partner." Sarah ran her fingers through his graying hair. "I was thinking about that night you found me crying," she said, "and how I would never have guessed in that moment that it would lead here, not just to material security, though that matters, but to a life where I wake up every day knowing that I'm loved by someone who truly sees me, all of me, the strong and the weak, the ambitious and the vulnerable. That's love," Marcus said simply. "The real version, showing up for someone day after day, choosing them even when it's hard." Emma and Lily had grown up watching their parents model this kind of love. Neither of them had unrealistic expectations about relationships. Both of them understood that real love required work and honesty and the willingness to keep choosing even when things became difficult. They were better prepared for their own eventual relationships because they'd seen love in action, honest and complicated and real. At Sarah and Marcus's 20-year anniversary party, held at the renovated restaurant where they'd met, hundreds of people gathered to celebrate them. But what struck both Sarah and Marcus most was seeing the women who'd gone through Sarah's foundation programs. Women who'd been transformed from desperation to stability, who'd rebuilt their lives with the help of resources and mentorship. "This is your legacy," Emma told her parents as they watched the women celebrate together. "Not the money or the companies. It's the lives you touched, the people you lifted up, the evidence that love can do real work in the world." That night, driving home through the quiet streets of Connecticut, Marcus reached over and held Sarah's hand. "Do you remember when I told you I didn't think I was capable of love?" he asked. "Of course," Sarah said. "I remember thinking you were broken in a way that might be irreparable." "I was," Marcus acknowledged, "but you repaired me, or rather, you loved me while I repaired myself. You didn't try to fix me or save me. You just loved me. And that made all the difference." Sarah squeezed his hand. "We saved each other," she said simply. "That's what real love does." 20 years after that first encounter, Sarah and Marcus had built a life that transcended the melodrama of their origin story. They'd created something sustainable, something real, something that proved that love across class lines, with all its complications and challenges, could not only survive, but actually thrive when both people were committed to honesty and growth. They'd built a family that extended beyond blood relationships to include mentees and protégés, friends and collaborators. They'd built organizations that transformed lives. They'd built a marriage that had deepened rather than faded with time. And most importantly, they'd built a love that was big enough to hold both the memory of where they'd started, a woman crying on restaurant floors, a man incapable of feeling, and the reality of where they'd arrived, two people who'd chosen each other over and over again, through crisis and triumph, through change and growth, through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that make up a life. As Sarah lay in bed beside Marcus that final evening of their anniversary celebration, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From desperation to security, from isolation to profound connection, from the 3 a.m. darkness of a restaurant floor to the warm glow of a life fully lived with another person. "I love you," she said to the darkness, to the man sleeping beside her, to the future that stretched ahead of them. And in the morning, Marcus woke and said the same thing, and they began another day of choosing each other, the real work of love, the beautiful, ordinary magic of committed partnership. And they lived truly and deeply and joyfully, happily ever after.